Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today we welcome back our friend Prash from Carbon Brown. How you going, Prash?
Hey Alex, good to be back here, man.
We're not going to talk about the usual stuff today. We're going to dive in and get some gritty stuff because you've been talking to some financial experts you presented recently, and it's always interesting to get their opinions on what is happening in the crypto space. So, what did you encounter there?
So I was in Auckland for the CFA conference, and I've had a number of people ask me why I was speaking at the Country Fire Association, but it's the Chartered Financial Analysts and Advisors Conference of New Zealand, which is an interesting conference to walk into. It's a bit like walking into the lion's lair, speaking to them.
Yeah.
But credit to them, they had a whole session set out for me, and there were probably about 70 people in the room, a couple of hedge fund managers in the front. And they sat through an hour-long session, but a couple of curly questions at the end. Quite enlightening to get an idea of exactly, one, how they feel about it, and to an extent, why they feel about cryptocurrency the way they do.
Yeah.
I guess sentiment on the whole is still, well, undeterred, not positive.
Yeah.
The primary line still seems to be the idea that it's unregulated. There's too much fear of market manipulation, and there's still that stigma of like, isn't this the stuff that's just used for money laundering? Like that stigma still carries through,
Yeah.
and it's a hard one to shift. Probably the most notable question that I got, or the one that was most curious to me was one where someone sort of sat back and went, "Well, why should we care?" Which was, apart from being a rather arrogant question, it did strike me as just how much there's no idea of exactly what the far-reaching implications of this are. And I think that's partly because the industry has been so focused on price points, right? So focused on price points, so focused on market capital, so focused on the sort of the economic value, that there really hasn't been enough filtering out into the mainstream about what the greater implications of what this technology could bring are.
Oh yeah, I was going to say last night, the Fed chairman Jerome Powell addressed everyone, and he was actually asked a question about Facebook's Libra, which normally they spoon feed them these questions in the press conferences, but he actually had to address it and sort of said, "Oh, we want to encourage technology and innovation." But Mario Draghi from the ECB has sort of said that central banks aren't threatened at all by cryptocurrencies; they're too small to worry about. But I honestly think within the next 12 months, maybe 24, they're going to have to acknowledge that this is now threatening traditional currencies, particularly if we have a downturn, which we might talk about later on as well.
I mean, when you talk about the public voice or what's put out there, the PR spin, it's not something we're worried about. It's not something we feel threatened about. We sort of need to separate it into how much of that is the PR front and how much of it is what they truly believe in. Yeah. You consider the big banks, you consider people like things like Goldman, JP Morgan, for example, who've been long spinning this line of this is a scam, this is just a fad, it's going to go away. But you know that in the background they've been working hard and building up the capacity to capitalize on it.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much I truly believe this idea of like, oh, it's truly not something that we need to worry about at all. And the fact that an organization like the CFA had me come down and speak to them means that they are taking notice, even if the general sense is that until regulation catches up, until regulation tells them what they can do, or Big Brother tells them what they can or cannot do, there's still going to be this tentativeness towards moving forward.
And something I tell people is back in 2013, 14, 15, when the banks were like, oh, this blockchain thing might be okay, but there's nothing with Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. And that was one of the worst things they could have done because it kind of gave the technology affirmation. And then people looked into it and saw that, hey, it's the mix of blockchain with all these other things that makes Bitcoin so great, and now we have more applications. But they almost helped Bitcoin survive at a time when it was really struggling. And we're almost seeing that again now with all of them experimenting with their own ledgers and then Facebook Coin, which we'll get into as well. Agree with all that? Anything to add to that, Prash?
I do. No, I think that's on point. The other point that I wanted to bring up from this conference, I guess, is that the taxation element was something that was sort of key on the minds of a lot of this population.
Yeah.
So the taxation, I think, is considerably different in New Zealand because they don't have capital gains tax, which is something I hadn't realized until I got there.
Yeah.
So not having capital gains tax means that you need to get really inventive about how you're going to tax this, and the New Zealand Tax Authority hasn't really come out with a firm circular on how this is going to happen. But there was almost this sigh of relief that Australia had just nailed it down to capital gains tax, and that every crypto trader was going to be fairly taxed. My key takeaway from that is that there is a sense within the financial services community of a sense of unfairness that cryptocurrency traders, investors, the ecosystem may be getting away with something, although they're not exactly clear what that is yet.
Yes.
But there's a sense that they're getting away with something, and that needs to rein back because the rest of us are not getting away with the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's a hard issue to solve.
Did they talk about? I mean, I've heard this from New Zealand as well, and I've asked some people. They sort of and ah a bit. So is this just on property and shares and everything, or I just don't see how you can have no capital gains tax in a G20 country?
It's true. I have not investigated enough since I came back.
Okay, that's all right. Something we'll both have to read up on.
We'll probably both read up on, but the broad line was that capital gains taxes was not a thing. In fact, New Zealand was pushing forward to try and instate capital gains tax probably about a year and a bit ago. I spoke at a libertarian conference about a week after this was in Sydney, called the Friedman Conference, and there was a whole presentation by a bunch of guys who had sort of rallied really hard to prevent capital gains tax from being instated in New Zealand. So I'm pretty sure it's a pretty broad coverage of that term.
They might see a lot of crypto investors move there, particularly if we have a huge run up for the next 2 years. Do you want wealthy people moving to your country to inject your capital? And that's why people are moving to Malta and whatnot. So I wish we had something similar in Australia, but I don't think they're going to cut crypto investors any slack here.
Singapore's another country with little to no capital gains tax, where you found there's a lot of crypto companies that are, not just crypto companies, but obviously a lot of corporates in general who are registered in Singapore purely for that reason. So it's a good example of what loosening the reins of what a free market can achieve will achieve.
Fantastic. So what are we seeing at the moment around the world? I mean, everyone's sort of sick of hearing about Venezuela and Argentina, but lately we've seen Turkey, Brazil, Italy, these other places sort of crop up. So what's interesting you at the moment globally?
That doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, it's only a matter of time. Any country that has struggled with either hyperinflation, loss of confidence in their own government, or any sort of political instability is going to start looking somewhere else. The thing about the cryptocurrency movement, and something I remind people about all the time, is that it's an entirely bottom-up movement, right? This is a movement that has gotten to where it is with zero top-down support and almost complete top-down resistance. It's been an entirely ground-level earthworm movement that's grown to where it is. So there's a bit of lag time for it to catch up in particular countries. So all circumstances need to be much more severe. So we saw that happen in Venezuela, for example, whereas places like Turkey, places like Italy, where this political instability has been sort of rumbling around and the unrest has been rumbling around in the background, it does take a long while before the groundswell from the ground up starts to tick over. I'm glad we're starting to see that happen. Obviously, the situation in Italy is particularly interesting when you consider that they're part of the EU, and that has far greater ramifications because it just becomes a lot more complex when you put it into the larger system of what's happening there. So it's a very interesting test case for me to see what happens there. The fact that a lot of legislation tends to be somewhat loose in Italy, allowing people to get away with a lot of legislative loosening, means that we might see greater uptick in Italy, but I mean it's still too early to tell. But that's definitely certainly something to watch.
Yeah, and just putting that in context, Bitcoin doesn't have a marketing department, and think about how any $100 billion company would normally have to go down that growth path and acquire users, and a lot of that top down where the pressure is coming from, they're the the biggest drivers of it, and they don't even realize it. So every day when they open their mouths, these central bankers, or they take interest rates negative, or they spur hyperinflation, and even just people that are unhappy with their government, somehow that still leads that libertarian down the rabbit hole to learn about why this is all happening in inequality, and leads them to Bitcoin. So it really is just a crazy story. That's why I love this industry so much.
When reality is your best marketing team, I think that says a lot. Yeah.
Is that a Prash quote? Am I going to have to borrow that one off you?
You can quote me on that one.
Awesome. So lately we've seen the Fed and just last week the ECB now come out and talk about cutting rates, whereas 6 months ago it was everything's great, we're normalizing. So do you have any thoughts on all this?
I shouldn't comment beyond my scope, but I think it's fair to say that for me this seems like a last gasp attempt. But I feel like I said last gasp attempt, the last interest rate cut, and here we've got another one. But there's got to be a limit to how low you can go, and it reeks of desperation. And I just wonder how much longer this can continue to stimulate the economy before the whole house of cards starts to fall over, right, at some point. And my greater worry is that the longer this goes on, the further collapse, the further you have to fall, and the harder that collapse is going to be. So, while yes, it buys the economy more time, I do worry that it's going to make things far worse in the long run. Which, without sounding too nihilistic, from a crypto advocate's point of view, I'm all for it. But
And I think the deepest we've got is maybe minus 1% in some regions in Europe. In Australia, what worries me is that the fact that we're almost to 1% now, and they're talking about a couple more before the end of the year even. If we get to maybe 0.5% before we're in a recession, and then we actually have a recession, traditionally they cut interest rates by around 5%. Now, once you start getting into deep negative interest rates, that gets really scary. And that guy that's been saving for his house deposit, he's got his $50,000 in his bank account, and then $2,000 of that is being taken away each year by having money that you saved in a bank. That is when people are just going to have the biggest liable moment ever, and all their friends are just going to say, park some money in Bitcoin or a stable coin, stuff the banks and these negative interest rates. I see it as just the biggest catalyst what's coming in the next downturn.
That's the point when economics starts to not make sense to the common man anymore. We've been fed all our lives. We've been fed a watered down version of what the economic model actually is, just on a need to know basis. But when you cross that line, it just doesn't make sense anymore, and that's when you'll see a revolt.
Exactly. So what do you think about the Bitcoin price recently? I know it was really tough times for all of us crypto businesses in crypto winter, and then it's probably even surprised us to the upside more quickly than we suspected, and it's going up again today at time of recording. So how's that all been for you, and what do you think about Bitcoin's price?
You're right. It has surprised most of us. It has surprised me as well. I didn't expect such a steady tick. Watching the charts, you're better qualified to talk about this than I am, probably, Alex. This is what you do day in, day out. But the pullbacks have been small. They've been steady. They've been regular. And there's been a consistent bounce back, which is a very encouraging sign. I think most of us expected a significant dip back down to sort of 6,000s, and that hasn't happened. Whether we still will, I don't know. But looking at what we're seeing, it seems like a trader's dream to watch the gradual pullback and the rise back again. But certainly inspires quite a confidence in the market to see sort of support levels holding their own.
Yeah, I've been talking about this a lot in our group, because a lot of people want this deep entry and a really nice, cozy, warm buying spot, and it's just not going to happen with everyone wanting to get in on the Bitcoin train. But if you actually look at it, we've had 20% dips recently, and in the stock market world, we call that a bear market, and people get worried. And in crypto, it's like not deep enough for people to buy.
No, in crypto, it's called Tuesday.
Yeah, it is crazy. Yeah. So what else has been happening for Calvin Brown? I know that custody space is something that a lot of people are looking to get into, or what sort of future directions are you wanting to take the business?
Well, one of the main innovations that we've been able to offer our clients is the capacity to place targets with us. So increasingly, we're allowing clients who've been trading with us that we have confidence in and we have a good working relationship with, to place deposits with us, such that we can sort of plan their investment schedule going forward, which just turns the whole operation into a far more sophisticated investing vehicle.
Yeah.
I mean, moving forward, we want to head down the line of creating our own sophisticated investment products and financial instruments, but that's still probably a good few months down the track.
Yeah, so I can ring up and say, hey, I've got $10,000. I'm not good at this trading thing. Can you dollar cost average me over the next month or something like that?
To an extent, more so would sit down, do a risk assessment, get a full idea of your portfolio, and then set targets for when you want to either enter the market or get out of the market. One of the main reasons is to try and keep people disciplined, right? It's the trader's biggest nightmare is when you let your own emotion get in the way, and when you have to be accountable to someone else, or you have someone else who's sort of holding you to that discipline of like, I set this as the target I wanted, this is what I wanted to achieve, and I'm going to keep to it. And someone else is making sure that this all happens according to a plan that we've pre-decided, and having someone who talks you through that process. That's what we're trying to make happen in a much more efficient manner.
So I sort of say to you, hey, if we get back to $20,000, I'll pull out a little bit my initial investment maybe, so that I've got nothing to lose, and then I ring you up when it hits 20,000 and say, oh, maybe we'll let it go a little bit more. It's sort of to try and prevent that, is it?
Well, to an extent, just to try and prevent that, but also to make sure that, I mean, a lot of our clients are high net worth clients who aren't going to be up at 2 a.m. watching the charts when the price hits the target they want to. So they want a broker who's there watching it, who's able to sell it out at the price that they've pre-decided, without then them having to watch it the next morning and go, oh, well, that was the price I wanted to get out at.
I know it's hard work, and obviously I'm lucky working from home, and I remember when Ethereum was crashing, I'm sort of sitting there on the phone, like waiting to ring you guys to get my, I think I bought Ethereum around $100, which turned out to be good after watching it drop to $80, but hey, that's crypto. And for those that haven't followed, obviously Carlton Brown provide that service where you can just pick up the phone. And is it $2,000 the minimum amount? And you guys do most cryptocurrencies these days?
We do. Effectively take any major fiat currency and turn that into any cryptocurrency that's out there. And one of our main value propositions is, one, the fact that it's a personalized service. You pick up the phone, you call, you talk to your broker handles everything for you. There's no support tickets. There's no complicated platforms. And the second thing is the capacity even for low liquidity coins that if you want it, we will go out and source it. And we've got multiple access points and sources. So we will get anything that our clients desire.
Do you have any thoughts on the altcoins that are all getting delisted at the moment? Because I know a lot of people do require Binance or Bittrex to plug in and get some liquidity. So do you think this is going to move to some DEXs? Or do you think that a lot of these altcoins that just aren't getting trading volume are unfortunately going to die?
It becomes a bit of a self-perpetuating prophecy though when we talk about this. So the altcoins that on one hand, I do think they will move to DEXs, but a lot of the altcoins that are getting delisted, the problem is once you delist them, that the market sentiment drops automatically. You see the market capital drop automatically. It was same conversation 2 days ago about why I felt Binance was the most powerful company or entity in cryptocurrency. And apart from their profit share and all of that, their capacity to ruin a coin or make a coin, the capacity to make a project much more than it is within the space of 24 hours just by the actions, whether it's listing or delisting a coin. That in effect makes them incredibly powerful. And so the capacity for an exchange to delist a coin, that it's a big thing for a coin to come back from.
I've got some really strong thoughts about this, and I'm trying to get CZ on for a really honest interview, because I don't think what they're doing is not sustainable. I don't think you can just say every week this is the new ICO and it's every ICO is worth $100 million. We're selling 5 or 10% of these tokens, FOMO in. I think they are powerful, but they're sort of playing outside the regulation bound. I actually think Coinbase is the most powerful company in crypto because they're doing everything right. If Binance get hacked again, there's a few of these IEOs turn out to be duds, they keep delisting coins, people are probably just going to jump over to KuCoin or back to Bittrex or something. So I think that Binance is incredibly powerful. Binance tokens probably going to keep going up if they keep inventing new use cases for it. But I think at some point they've got their finger in too many pies, and people come and try to get your market share because they've done so well.
There is a lot of negative sentiment around Binance. For all that they are, there is a lot of negative sentiment, and that comes down to the fact that there's a recognition of how much power they control, and that they seem to wield it to an extent to their own benefit, and not necessarily with the greatest sort of thought for the entire ecosystem as a whole. Which right now, I think most of us are trying our best to keep the ecosystem as a whole at the forefront of our minds.
Yeah, and the final thing I would say about those coin delistings is one of the reasons we focused on fundamental analysis is we're trying to pick projects where in the next year or two they'll have a working product which uses the token and has genuine utility, because Binance, it's great for speculation and they can determine if a coin's going to survive and pump and whatnot. But once we have these projects that are actually using the token the way it's intended, it doesn't really matter what the trading volume is. If there's more businesses using it, that's what gives it value. So that's kind of where I see Binance becoming less relevant and real world use case becoming more relevant. Agree with all that?
I agree. I also wait for, I mean, this is a bit further in the distance, but when you got regulation coming in, when you got greater mainstream adoption, what happens when the ASX starts listing cryptocurrency? You know, what happens when the New York Stock Exchange starts listing different cryptocurrencies? What are the exchanges going to do at that point? How can you still remain relevant in a marketplace like that, where you have obsolescence staring you in the face tomorrow? So if I were an exchange, I'd be doing my best to reap whatever I can now, because I do think there's a Kodak moment, sort of in the distance. There's a reason why we never wanted to be an exchange, where our main aim was to create a much more sophisticated product. But I do think the exchanges are trying, or are trying to get whatever they can now in the next couple of years, before we head down that route.
Yeah, that's another piece on the chessboard for Binance, and they did move to Malta and partner up with, I can't remember who now, but they're trying to get their foot in that door, but it's a very slow-moving, heavy regulated, and people are starting to see that now. It's been over 12 months since everyone was talking about, STOs and the next big wave, big thing, and look how slow and gradual that's been, Any final thoughts for everyone at home, Prash?
Well, the main topic, I guess, this week has been Facebook Coin, or Libra.
Of course, yes.
Which there's been a lot of murmuring about. In fact, from the financial services conference, I've had a couple of emails, people writing to me this week to ask about Libra and my thoughts on it, and quite excited about it. The whole wave of I don't trust Bitcoin, but I'll trust Facebook, which in itself is I mean, the idea behind that comment in itself is quite laughable. I have a lot of concerns about Libra. To be honest, I'm quite terrified by what it does promise. I think it's a very scary notion. I think in the short term, there's a lot of promise in terms of what it will bring to the cryptocurrency ecosystem. I think it will drive adoption. It will drive awareness. It will have people understanding what this term even means. If it starts to be used, they'll understand how to use a cryptocurrency. I think in the medium term, I think there's a lot of benefit for the developing world economies if it truly brings what it promises to bring, which is an inflation-proof global currency. But in the long term, this sort of new world order, sit at the table, determine the financial future of anyone who's pegged to this coin is terrifying. And I think more than anything else, what Facebook and Libra coin has pointed out is all the reasons why cryptocurrency is even more relevant. The need for true decentralization, for one. The need to not have a central point of failure. You've seen the news about Congress coming out and wanting to ban Libra, and the EU coming out and wanting to having serious concerns about Libra.
I think China as well, just this morning.
Without question. And that's just another example of what happens when you have a centralized authority. You've got a central point of control, you have a central point of failure. And just another advertisement all over again for why the true decentralized nature, the true permissionless nature of the cryptocurrency network, of the Bitcoin network, is so valuable.
Yeah, it's the 2014-15 banks all over again for me when they're saying blockchain, not Bitcoin. Now Facebook is saying cryptocurrency, not Bitcoin, and it's just going to lead so many people to the light. This is my question for anyone who's watching and who's been looking into Libra.
is it a blockchain? Is it not a blockchain? Is it a Merkle tree? Is it a chain of blocks? If you read the white paper, there's so much inconsistency even within the white paper as to what actually this platform is.
Yeah, I agree.
I was speaking to Hannah Rosenberg, the director of the Blockchain Institute in Chicago, and she's got some very strong opinions on this inconsistency, and just trying to clarify and explain to me. Like, I'm not the most technical person, and trying to explain to me this idea of the Merkle tree and not a blockchain, although blockchain is sort of splattered all over the Facebook white paper.
Yeah, and they're talking about smart contracts and whatnot, so I'm not really sure, again, how you can have it both ways with some of the stuff they're talking about. So, yeah, that remains to be seen. But, guys, for all your crypto needs, over $2,000, pick up the phone. We've got a discount. You guys are doing great work there, Prash, and customers are always happy.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, guys.
Good chat, man. Cheers.